Sometimes we ask, does Seventh-day Adventist education make a difference? Does attending an Adventist school, college, or university provide something more than attending any other good educational institution? Is what I pay for Adventist education an expense or an investment? Pastors and church leaders sometimes ask, is Adventist education an integral part of our evangelistic commission? Does Adventist education result in the spiritual development of those who attend? And if it does, how can we convey this to church members and other interested persons in a clear and persuasive way? Today, we will endeavor to answer these questions. We begin with the affirmation. Seventh-day Adventist education is the longest and largest evangelistic event in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. First, in terms of duration. Depending on the country and the educational level, a student may be involved with education 5 to 9 hours a day, 460 to 260 days per year, and perhaps from 1 or more years of education in an Adventist school. At minimum, this represents 800 hours of contact of that student with the Adventist educational process. And it may reach 37,000 hours or more if one were to attend through elementary, high school, and college. Even if a person attends only for 1 year, that is 800 hours. Or to think of it another way, that is an attending an evangelistic event, 2 hours each evening for 400 evenings. Clearly, the longest evangelistic endeavor of the church. In terms of size, we can think of Adventist education as evangelistic sites, teachers as evangelists, and students as those attending this evangelistic event. In terms of children, there are 6,000 sites each day where children interact with the good news of the gospel. More than 50,000 evangelists, and those attending more than 1,100,000 children. In terms of adolescents, we have 2,548 sites, more than 40,000 evangelists, and those attending are 575,000. In terms of youth, we have more than 150 sites, 14,000 evangelists, and more than 175,000 attending colleges and universities. Altogether, we have 8,800 evangelistic sites, 106,000 evangelists, and more than 1,800,000 attending each day. Clearly, Seventh-day Adventist education is the longest and largest evangelistic event of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But is it effective? To answer that question, the Cognitive Genesis study looked at the cognitive and non-cognitive factors that contributed to the success of students in Adventist education. It was a longitudinal study that took place between the years 2006 and 2009. Over 800 schools participated in the United States, Canada, and Bermuda. 52,000 students in grades 3 through 9 and grade 11, as well as the parents of these students and the teachers and principals of the participating schools. Results of the study indicated that students in Seventh-day Adventist schools surpassed the national average on standardized tests in all subject areas. For all grade levels, for all school sizes. And where there were any differences, these tended to favor the smaller schools. And furthermore, regardless of ability level. There was something else important, and that is that with increasing number of years in the Seventh-day Adventist school system, the difference became more pronounced, both in terms of achievement as well as ability. Another important result of the study was graduation rate. 82% of students in general nationwide would graduate from high school. Whereas in Seventh-day Adventist education, graduation rate was 98.4%. And of these, 91% planned to attend higher education. Given results such as these, Martin Doblmeier created a public television documentary, The Blueprint, that tells the story of Seventh-day Adventist education and examines the factors that are associated with these important differences in Seventh-day Adventist education. Clearly, the academic result is impressive. However, this is not the most important result of Adventist education. Scripture, for example, asks us, what will you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Ellen White states, writing to teachers, that the most important matter is the conversion of the students. And according to the biblical model, conversion results in joining the church. So we turn to the matter of accession, of joining the church. What is the role of Seventh-day Adventist education? In terms of baptisms that directly result from Adventist education, perhaps through a week of prayer, through the ministry of teachers, through the work of a chaplain, we find over a 10-year period that these range from 40 to 50,000. In all, over 450,000 baptisms. Or to think of it another way, that is one conference established each year directly as a result of Adventist education. There have been a couple of studies that have examined this matter of Adventist education and joining the church. One of these was conducted in the Southern Union in the United States and involved 844 participants. These were children from Seventh-day Adventist families. It looked at those who received no Adventist education, those who received 1 or more years of Adventist education, and those who received 11 or more years of Adventist education. And then it compared the proportion of those who had been baptized and those who had never been baptized. For those with no Adventist education, 59.9% had joined the church. 40% had not joined. 84.6% of those with 1 or more years of Adventist education joined, and about 15% never joined. And those with 11 or more years Adventist education, 96.9% joined, 3.1% never joined. If we compare the proportion of those with 11 years and those with no Adventist education, they were 13 times more likely to have never joined when they received no Adventist education. Another study in the Lake Union examined 807 participants, children from Seventh-day Adventist families. Again, it compared those with no Adventist education, some Adventist education, and those who had received, in this case, 12 years of Adventist education, elementary and secondary. And then it looked at those who had joined the church and those who never joined. For those with no Adventist education, nearly 62% joined, but 38% never joined. For those with some Adventist education, 95% had joined, nearly 5% had not joined. And in this case, those with 12 years of education, 100% joined and none had never been baptized. Again, important differences. Or to look at it another way, those who were never baptized, although they came from Adventist families, had on average 2.4 years of Adventist education, whereas those who had been baptized had received at least, on average, 8 years of Adventist education. Perhaps this is why Ellen White wrote, "The work of education and the work of redemption are one." Adventist education, then, is mission, and we must reaffirm the central role of Adventist education in the evangelistic mission of the church. We now turn to the second matter, the matter of retention. They join the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but do they remain in the Adventist Church? What is the role of Adventist education? The matter of members who leave is troublesome. Since 1965, more than 34 million people have joined the Adventist Church. Some of those remained. Others, tragically, left. 20.6 million members remained in the church, while 13.7 million left. The net loss rate is close to 40%. That means that of every 10 members, 6 remained, while sadly, 4 slipped away. And the situation is not improving. Looking at a more recent period, the years 2000 through 2012, the net loss rate was over 43%. And what about young people? The Youth Retention Study was a landmark study that involved more than 1,500 young people, 15, 16 years old, when they began their participation in the study. It was representative of Seventh-day Adventist youth, large and small churches, small towns, urban areas, those attending public schools and Adventist schools, and representing ethnic diversity. These young people were interviewed each year for the next 10 years. One of the important questions addressed by the study was how many had left the church by age 25, 26. Sadly, in many demographic groups, that percentage approached 50%. So we're losing not just 1 out of 10 coins. As Jesus talked about in the parable, we are losing half of the coins. Perhaps that is why the prophet Jeremiah asked, "Where is the flock that was entrusted to you, your beautiful flock?" There have been at least 7 studies that have examined this matter of retention and the role of Seventh-day Adventist education. These studies have spanned a 30-year period, with 3 of the studies having been conducted in the last 10 years. The studies also took place in a variety of settings and utilized various research strategies. The first 2 of these studies were studies that were large multi-year studies. The Value Genesis study was conducted first in 1990, then Value Genesis 2 in the year 2000, and Value Genesis 3 in 2010. The Youth Retention Study, as we have mentioned, followed Seventh-day Adventist youth over a 10-year period. Then we have 3 studies that were the result of doctoral dissertations. These studies examine Seventh-day Adventist children and youth in 3 different settings. Finally, there have been more recently 2 global studies. One of these was a qualitative study that involved interviews with Seventh-day Adventists, and the other was a study especially focusing on the matter of leaving the church. We will highlight a few results from each of these studies. First of all, the Value Genesis study. This study examined data from over 2,000 12th grade Seventh-day Adventist students and showed that the more years of Adventist education, the greater the person's loyalty to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Also, the greater their belief in the fundamental doctrines of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Also, their intention to remain a Seventh-day Adventist at age 40 was higher the more years they had attended a Seventh-day Adventist school. The study also examined those factors that are related to the development of religious faith. You can see a number of those factors on the screen. The most important factor, however, was attending a Seventh-day Adventist school. In fact, 81% of all students said, attending an Adventist school is the most important thing that has helped me develop my religious faith. The Youth Retention Study, as we have noted, was a study that looked at Seventh-day Adventist young people beginning at age 15 and 16, and then followed those young people for the next 10 years. There were a number of important findings, but one of them is that the number of years in Seventh-day Adventist education was related to certain important characteristics, such as commitment to Jesus Christ. My relationship with Christ is stronger now. It was also related to the belief that religion is important in my life and to participation in personal Bible study, all of which are important outcomes in the life of a young person that are strengthened through Seventh-day Adventist education. The Youth Retention Study also examined the matter of remaining in the Seventh-day Adventist Church 10 years later when these young people were 25 or 26 years old. And it compared those who had attended Adventist schools and non-Adventist schools. Those who had attended non-Adventist schools, 65% remained in the Seventh-day Adventist Church 10 years later. Those who attended Adventist schools, however, 91% remained in the church. Or to look at it another way, the probability of leaving the Seventh-day Adventist Church was 4 times greater in those who attended non-Adventist schools compared with those attending Seventh-day Adventist schools. We now turn to the Epperson study. This study, as we had mentioned when reviewing the matter of baptisms and the role of Seventh-day Adventist education, examined young people who had received no Adventist education, 1 or more years Adventist education, and 11 or more years Adventist education. It then looked at the matter of church attendance, whether that was regular, infrequent, or no church attendance. Those with no Adventist education, 58% attended church regularly. Those with 1 or more years of Adventist education, 79% attended church regularly. And those with 11 or more years of Adventist education, 90% attended church regularly. Or to look at it another way, the difference between those who had no Adventist education and those with 11 or more years education is that those with no Adventist education were 4.5 times more likely to have infrequent or no church attendance. This is important because when people become inactive in the church, they tend to leave the Adventist church. The fourth study was conducted by Robert Rice in Southern California. He followed a group of young people from Seventh-day Adventist families for a 13-year period. Some of these young people had graduated from Seventh-day Adventist academies. Others, however, had graduated from public high schools. He then examined whether 13 years later, these individuals had 1, been baptized and were still attending, 2, were a member but no longer attending, 3rd, were no longer a member, or 4th, had never been baptized. For those young people from Seventh-day Adventist families who had graduated from a public high school, 37% had been baptized and were still attending 13 years later. 7% were a member but no longer attending. Tragically, 38% had been baptized but were no longer a member, and 18% had never been baptized. For those who had graduated from a Seventh-day Adventist academy, however, 77% had been baptized and were still attending 13 years after graduation. 5% were a member and no longer attending. 13% were no longer a member, and 6% had never been baptized. In essence, young people were twice as more likely to stay in the Seventh-day Adventist Church 13 years later if they had graduated from a Seventh-day Adventist academy. Or to look at the data another way, those who were no longer involved with the Seventh-day Adventist Church 13 years later were 63% of the young people who had graduated from a public high school, compared with 23% of the young people who graduated from a Seventh-day Adventist academy. The study also examined the matter of those who married a Seventh-day Adventist. For those who had graduated from a public high school, 27% married a Seventh-day Adventist, whereas the graduates from Seventh-day Adventist academies, 78% married a Seventh-day Adventist. 3 times more likely to marry an Adventist if they had graduated from a Seventh-day Adventist academy. The fifth study is the Minder study that we discussed briefly when we talked about baptisms and the role of Seventh-day Adventist education. This study looked at those children from Seventh-day Adventist families who had received no Adventist education, some Adventist education, or 12 years, both elementary and secondary, in Seventh-day Adventist schools. Then it considered not just those who had been baptized, but those who had been baptized and remained in the church. Those with no Adventist education, although they were from Adventist families, 50% joined and remained as young adults. About 11% had joined and then left the church, and 38% had never joined. Of those with some Adventist education, nearly 79% joined and remained in the church as young adults. 16% joined but subsequently left, and about 5% had never joined. Of those who had been educated in Adventist schools throughout elementary and secondary, all 12 years, 98% not only had joined, but remained in the Seventh-day Adventist Church as young adults. Only about 2% had joined and then left. Again, important differences in terms of retention in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The sixth study was conducted by the Center for Creative Ministry. It was a large global study that utilized interviews both of current members as well as those who had lapsed in their membership or were no longer members. And among the various factors, it examined the role of Seventh-day Adventist education. Those who had lapsed membership or were no longer members, only 17% had attended Seventh-day Adventist education. The remainder had attended other forms of education. Those who were current members, however, 56% had attended Adventist education, and the remainder other forms of education. The difference between these groups is significant. 3 times more likely to have attended Adventist education among those who remained as members of the Adventist Church. The final study that we will consider was conducted by the Office of Archives, Statistics, and Research. It was a global study encompassing 9 out of the 13 world divisions. This study, among other matters, looked at those who were members of the church currently and those who were no longer members, in terms of whether they had attended Adventist education or other education at the 3 different levels: elementary, secondary, and tertiary education. In terms of elementary education, those who were ex-members, about 15.5%, had attended Adventist education, whereas those who were current members, 46%, had attended Adventist education. At the secondary level, those who were no longer members, 14%, had attended Adventist education, and those who were current members, 35%. Of those who had attended higher education, in the group who was no longer a member of the church, 7% had attended Seventh-day Adventist education, while the group of current members, 13% had attended Adventist education. So if we look at those who stayed, we find in current members twice the probability of having participated in Adventist education at higher educational levels. At secondary levels, 2.5 times more probable. And in the group of elementary education, 3 times more probable to have attended an Adventist school, compared with those who were no longer members of the church. These differences should not surprise us, however. While there are important relationships between retention and Adventist education at each level within Adventist education, the strongest relationships are those in the earliest years. So we return to the important question: are the accession and retention of children and youth in the church associated with their participation in Adventist education? And the answer to that question is certainly. There is a strong, consistent, and persuasive relationship between attending a Seventh-day Adventist school and joining and remaining in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And this is true in different times, in different places, and in different populations. Perhaps that is why Scripture tells us, train up a child in the way he should go. In Seventh-day Adventist education, children and youth experience joining the church. They also remain in the church. But the purpose of both of these experiences is that they might experience redemption. That is why Ellen White wrote, in the highest sense, the work of education and the work of redemption are one. Adventist education makes a difference. Not only does it prepare well children and youth in the sciences, in language and history and technology, it views each student as a candidate of heaven. Adventist education does make a difference. Adventist education educates for eternity.